Hey, welcome to Pop Culture Graveyard. I am Hollis, and today I'm doing a magnificent 7 of Rockin' soundtracks. These are soundtracks that rock. First, some ground rules. No film scores. Otherwise you'd be hearing about The Shining, or Planet of the Apes, or Bell Book and Candle. Secondly, no films documenting a music scene or a live concert. Otherwise you'd be hearing about Stop Making Sense, or Monterey Pop, or Athens GA Inside Out. Finally, no period music. Otherwise you'd be hearing about American Graffiti, and Dazed and Confused, and Almost Famous. I'm talking about soundtracks that use well-known songs to enhance a film. So let's get to it. When is a Magnificent 7 actually a Magnificent 8? That's when that 8th album is over at my Patreon. You can join and unlock that last album review. I'm not going to tell you what that album is, but it's another rockin' soundtrack. It is patreon.com/popculturegraveyard. I hope to see you there. For the rest of you, on with the show. The Magnificent 7. First up, That Summer, 1979, Arista Records. This is a British film. It was the film that introduced the actor Ray Winstone, who you later would know in Sexy Beast. And if you see this soundtrack anywhere out in the wild, jump. It is an instant cool record collection. This was not released on CD, so hunt down the vinyl because it's awesome. In the movie, Ray Winstone stars as a guy who gets out of a borstal, or juvie, hitchhikes down to a seaside town, and tries to become a competitive swimmer. It's so much better than it sounds. I'm going to put a link to the film below. By the way, Ray Winstone was also in Quadrophenia and Ladies and Gentlemen, The Fabulous Stains. So you could do a lot worse for a record collection than nothing but a bunch of soundtracks of Ray Winstone films. Anyway, this soundtrack is killer. It features downtown NYC punk in the form of Patti Smith, Richard Hell, and the Ramones. UK punk in the form of Eddie and the Hot Rods, Boomtown Rats, and the Undertones. New wave in Elvis Costello, Ian Dury, Nick Lowe, and so much more. Listen, any soundtrack that features Another Girl, Another Planet by The Only Ones, and Whole Wide World by Reckless Eric is an all-time classic. I mentioned downtown NYC punk. This has a song called Spanish Stroll on it by Mink DeVille. Mink will feature prominently in another soundtrack I'm going to talk about later, but his song Spanish Stroll on here is an underheard classic. If you watch the film, it is well made and a unique time capsule. However, the songs get a bit lost in the film because they're used so incidentally. For example, you'll hear Richard Hell's Blank Generation for about 10 seconds coming out of a car radio. Because the Night is another one that's on a car radio for about 10 seconds before the characters leave the car. If the songs were featured a little more prominently in the film, I could see the film building up more of a cult audience. As is, it's kind of an underknown little film, and is greatly overshadowed by a killer rockin' soundtrack. Incidentally, the majority of the film takes place in Torquay, which was the setting for Fawlty Towers. Ray Winstone's character works in a bar named The Pickwick. As of a couple of years ago, that bar was still there, and it's known as Twiggy's Bar. So if you're heading down to Torquay, pop in to Twiggy's Bar and tell them Hollis sent you. Enjoy your holiday. This next one is a real quick one. It's 1984's Party Animal. This was a fairly offensive sex comedy in which a character named Pondo Sinatra, while working in the school lab trying to make moonshine, he accidentally concocts a formula that makes him irresistible to women. As the subhead here says, a chemical reaction got him some action. Anyway, this may be a rather base teenage sex farce. Aside from the plot, this is a killer rockin' soundtrack. This movie's soundtrack first introduced me to bands like the Buzzcocks, the Fleshtones, the Untouchables, Chelsea. It sent me searching for this music, and I quickly went out and bought everything by the Buzzcocks and the Fleshtones and all these bands that I was interested in. Unfortunately, a soundtrack to Party Animal was never released, so I had to go do it old school style and put it together piecemeal. But it is a killer soundtrack. If you ever want to watch the film, if you're not a 15-year-old boy, it does not hold up. But this is one of the best soundtracks to any film I've ever seen. Up next, Repo Man, 1984, San Andreas Records. I don't know San Andreas Records, but I really like their packaging. It's a picture of a fist coming out of the ground in the middle of the desert, it seems, punching a record. How that fist knew the record was there, I have no idea. If you haven't seen the movie Repo Man, I don't quite know how to explain it to you. Do you like punk rock music? Do you like aliens? How about Lorna Doones? It's a very odd film. If you've seen it at a certain age, you will love it forever. And the soundtrack is a major part of the film. You could almost call the soundtrack another character in the film. And the soundtrack actually saved the film. As I said, it's a rather odd film. And the film did not open as strongly as Universal would have liked. So 1 week after it opened, Universal pulled the film from theaters. It was only after the film's soundtrack sold 50,000 copies that the studio allowed the film back out on the road, where it became a cult hit, and it played in late-night movie houses and college campuses for years. It became an even bigger hit on home video. As for the soundtrack, it's a primer on West Coast punk. And why not? Tito Larriva, leader of Chicano punk legends The Plugs, was a music supervisor on this film, and Tito provided 3 songs: the sax-saturated rave-up Y Clavo y la Cruz, The Nail and the Cross, a Spanish-language version of Secret Agent Man, Hombre Secreto, and an epically beautiful instrumental called Reel 10. But the soundtrack kicks off with Repo Man, the title track by Iggy Pop. It's the song that ran under the movie's opening credits. And the music itself, with ex-Sex Pistol Steve Jones on lead guitar, sounds like a metallic hybrid of Pipeline and the Peter Gunn theme. As for the lyrics, Iggy is spitting out a series of road rage rants and keeps repeating how he's looking for the joke with a microscope. There's a great Devo-esque cover of Jonathan Richman's Pablo Picasso by some band called the Burning Sensations. It's playing on the car radio of a car driven by Otto, the lead character played by Emilio Estevez, when he's driving down the street trying to pick up a girl. And the lyrics, he would walk down the street, the girls could not resist his stare. Pablo Picasso was never called an asshole. Fit like a glove. Black Flag's classic TV Party is not only used in the film, but is also sung by the character Otto one night when he's walking home. The band Circle Jerks have 2 excellent songs in the film. One is Coup d'etat, which is a punk classic, and one is When the Shit Hits the Fan. Funnily enough, one of the actors in the film, Xander Schloss, who plays Kevin the Nerd, who's Otto's best friend, he actually would join the Circle Jerks as their bass player and stay with them for years. Xander was also the guitarist who would help Joe Strummer make music during that period between The Clash and forming the Mescaleros. So he was very important to getting Joe Strummer back doing music. So thank you, Mr. Schloss. Anyway, other iconic punk songs featured here are Institutionalized by Suicidal Tendencies, whose lyrics about a disaffected youth's parents trying to put him in an institution when all he wants is a Pepsi, is possibly the most on-the-nose song here when you consider the punk rock kids that are featured in the story. Let's Have a War by Fear, if you've never heard it, is probably the hardest song on this soundtrack, and it's a great introduction to everything that Fear does well. If you don't know punk music, Let's Have a War by Fear is an adrenaline shot to the heart with a dirty needle, and it will either turn you off forever to punk rock, or it will make you a lifelong fan. Finally, there's a very funny track called Bad Man, which basically consists of the coolest of all the Repo Men in the movie, Light, a guy played by Cy Richardson, reciting some of his best lines from the movie over a laid-back, funky beat provided by someone called the Juicy Bananas. It provides a nice musical respite, as well as some well-warranted comedy relief. One more thing, though they're not featured on the soundtrack, the ska revival band, The Untouchables, actually has a small part in the film. They play some loving grandsons who beat the crap out of Otto after he tries to repossess their grandmother's car. In closing, this is one of the best soundtracks ever put together. Every punk record collection should have this soundtrack. Or just buy this soundtrack, and you'll suddenly have a punk record collection. Up next, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, 1982, put out on Elektra Asylum Records. First, a disclaimer. There are several songs that are used perfectly in Fast Times that are not on this soundtrack. We got The Beat by the Go-Go's, which plays under the opening credits. American Girl by Tom Petty, which plays under the First Day of School montage. Led Zeppelin's Kashmir, which plays when Rat is driving Stacy to their first date. But the most painful omission is the cars moving in stereo. Try and picture the iconic scene of Linda, played by the irresistible Phoebe Cates, getting out of the pool and removing her bikini top to any other song than Moving in Stereo. Nothing else works. Now, had those all been included, we'd be talking about an all-time classic soundtrack. Not just because of their inclusion, but because of some of the dead wood that their inclusion would push off the soundtrack. Speaking of which, it must be noted that a great deal of Amy Heckerling's soundtrack was co-opted by none other than Irving Azoff. Irving, who was the Eagles manager, managed to get solo songs out of 4 out of 5 Eagles onto this soundtrack. Only Glenn Frey is missing. There are plenty of great songs still on this Rockin' soundtrack, and it is a double LP, so let's get into it. Somebody's Baby by Jackson Browne kicks the soundtrack off in true California casual style, and you probably already know what a great song that is. Can you think of a better song than Jackson Browne's Somebody's Baby as the musical bed for Stacy losing her virginity in a baseball dugout to a douchey stereo salesman? I don't think so. Joe Walsh is next with something called Waffle Stomp, the title of which is derived from something so gross I implore you not to Google it. You might remember the song best as the track that's playing when Judge Reinhold's Brad is in his car flirting with Nancy Wilson, Mrs. Cameron Crowe, while in full pirate gear. It's the perfect song to underline this dorky mishap. Up next is Louise Goffin, yes, the daughter of songwriting legends Carole King and Jerry Goffin, with her song Uptown Boys. It's a pretty lightweight song, but Louise puts it over with her tasty voice and a truckload of attitude. There was a time when her label thought she was going to blow up big, and you can hear why. As I said earlier, We Got the Beat was nowhere to be found, but the Go-Go's do show up on the soundtrack with the song Speeding, which was the B-side to Get Up and Go off their Vacation album. Speeding is a Chuck Berry-inspired rocker that is all about loving to drive fast, and I think it's an underrated Go-Go's song. Don't Be Lonely by Quarter Flash is on here. Listen, Quarter Flash had a moment, and it was glorious, and I've always loved singer Rindy Ross's voice. They're the pride of Canada, for Christ's sakes. Oh, that's Gordon Lightfoot. They're Canadian. Anyway, Don't Be Lonely is a great song, and a sweet little 1-2 punch with Speeding. One song that director Amy Heckerling didn't want on the soundtrack, but was forced to use, was raised on the radio by someone called the Ravens. That's Ravens with a Y. Amy hated it because it was glossy and fun, and miles away from the punkier song she had originally envisioned for the film. But the song is used while Brad is washing his vintage car, and Brad is a white bread dork. He would love this song, and it's so spot on for his character. And when I hear this song, I picture that scene, which is what you want from a soundtrack, I think. So I'd say its inclusion was a happy accident. There are 2 Fast Times songs on this album. One, Fast Times, is a really fun and funky rocker by no less than Billy Squier. The second one, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, is by the Red Rocker himself, Sammy Hagar. Neither song is going to stay with you long after you hear it, but they're both fun. Sammy's song sounds like Kiss doing a cover of Shout at the Devil. Doesn't that sound great? And the lyrics are pure teen cheese. Just yesterday, my friend got busted. She came home smelling like smoke. It's such a shame when you're not trusted. She only had one little toke. All right, Sammy. Not only can she not drive 55, I think she's grounded. Full disclosure, I am not a big Jimmy Buffett fan. But Jimmy Buffett's track, Spicoli's theme, totally adds value to Fast Times, the movie and the soundtrack. In lots of ways, this song, which plays over a test-taking montage, with its refrain of I don't know if I'm high or I'm low, I don't know, is one of the most identifiable from the film. And it's the perfect theme song for Sean Penn's spacey character, Spicoli. Donna Summer's Highway Runner. Offhand, I can't tell you where it appears in the film, but getting any song that Donna did with Giorgio Moroder is a big win. In fact, the song is about as new wave as Donna gets, and it almost sounds like an outtake from an album by Berlin. Stevie Nicks' Sleeping Angel, used in the scene where Stacy waits around for Damone to take her to the free clinic, but he doesn't show up, so she has to go by herself. It's a pitch-perfect use of the song, and it wrenches so much more emotion out of that scene. And Sleeping Angel, I can honestly say, is a top 5 Stevie Nicks song for me. Album closer, Goodbye Goodbye by Oingo Boingo, is the perfect way to end this album, and to end the film, where it plays under the closing credits. Listen, I'm not saying there's not some dead wood on this soundtrack, but it's a double album, so it can totally withstand it. And it is still quite affordable, and I think, a rockin' soundtrack. Up next, Times Square, 1980, RSO Records. At its best, an excellent soundtrack can give you an instant cool record collection, and Times Square is a perfect example of that. Not only that, it's a double album, and it's never been released on CD, so people kind of sleep on this album, and it's still affordable on vinyl. I bought this one for $5. It all kicks off with Suzi Quatro, who should be considered the spiritual godmother of this film, given that it concerns young girls who find their place in a gritty music scene dominated by men. Suzi's song Rock Hard that's used here is one of her best, and one of the best tracks that ace songwriters Chapman and Chin ever wrote. It's a thrilling, guitar-drenched ode to a girl whose love is rock hard. The Pretenders' Talk of the Town is next, and one of their most underrated songs. And in my opinion, it's one of Chrissie Hynde's most unique vocal deliveries, melodically speaking. Just awesome. Roxy Music's Same Old Scene is next, showing the blend of genres at which this soundtrack excels. The song is off their Flesh and Blood album and is one of the prettier songs on here. Roxy blends effortlessly into Gary Numan's Down in the Park, one of his best songs. It's such a sweet sounding song, yet down in the park some very scary things are happening. First of all, there's a rape machine. There are people playing something called Kill by Numbers, and you can hear the chant of death, death, death. I'd rather be up in a high-rise with Gary Numan helping him apply his makeup than down in the park. Now a warning, downshifting from Gary Numan into Robin Gibb may give you whiplash, but it's just a reminder that this soundtrack is on RSO Records, owned by Robert Stigwood, who was the managerial force behind the Bee Gees. And guess what? I love the song. It's a duet called Help Me. Robin sings it with Marcy Levy, and it's got all the best elements of a Bee Gees production. Don't sleep on the Bee Gees, man. Life During Wartime sees the Talking Heads at their most jerky and jittery, and it's an irresistibly funky song. Pretty Boys is a seldom heard and cool as fuck Joe Jackson song. Joe is one of my favorite voices, and in this amphetamine rush of a song, Joe talks about pretty boys in bands for whom facelifts and pointed shoes matter more than talent. I don't have to sell you on I Want to Be Sedated by the Ramones. Every soundtrack would benefit from the addition of I Want to Be Sedated. It totally stamps the film and the soundtrack with the vibe it needs to lay down a legit parable of the downtown music scene of the time. It was another single from the soundtrack. Take This Town by XTC is next, and it's pretty representative of early XTC. Cool, hectic, and off the wall. This song was recorded especially for the film, and would later show up on the 1990 Rare Cut compilation, Rag and Bone Buffet. It was one of 4 singles released from the soundtrack. Actress Robin Johnson closes Outside 2 with Damn Dog, her hit in the film, such as it is. It's got solid production which elevates the track from parody to punk passion. The song is so well done that the film around it seems all the more realistic. Disc 2 of this 2LP set kicks off with another song from within the film. Your Daughter Is One is a 2-minute rant by the girls and slams a racist father by chronicling his history of racial slurs. You might want to close the window before listening to that one. Babylon's Burning by the Ruts is next. If this soundtrack does nothing else but introduce you to the Ruts, it's been a great success. Babylon's Burning opens up with a fire truck siren, as the song prophesizes the destruction of Western civilization in a most raucous way. The Ruts are fantastic, and their debut album, The Crack, which also kicks off with Babylon's Burning, is a classic. By the way, Babylon's Burning was the B-side to the Take This Town single release by XTC. Next is an energetic cover of You Can't Hurry Love by someone called DL Byron. But it actually sounds very much like it's sung by Cher. Seriously. I'm going to put a link below. Forget that it's somebody else. Tell me if you hear Cher. Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed adds more NYC gravitas and grit, and it's hard to think of a better song to be playing at the time in Times Square. Now, for any film soundtrack in 1980, to have a track by The Cure is pretty damn impressive. But the fact that it's a deep cut, Grinding Halt, makes it doubly impressive. Grinding Halt is pretty much a clinic on who The Cure were in 1980. Staccato guitars, burbling bass, yelped nasal vocals. Grinding Halt is one of the coolest tracks on here, and is one of the reasons that this soundtrack has aged as well as it did. If you thought you were going to get through an entire double album called Times Square without one New York doll, you are sadly mistaken. David Johansen sings a duet with star Robin Johnson called Flowers in the City. Oddly enough, Flowers in the City is the one song on this album that does not appear in the film. Patti Smith Group is next with Pissing in a River, credited here as pissing in the river, which has always been one of my favorite Patti Smith songs. It's damned epic is what it is. The way that the song slowly builds in intensity has always gotten me. It's methodical and melodic and poetic as hell. Conversely, Dangerous Type by The Cars appears in the movie, but does not appear on the soundtrack. I suspect that Flowers in the City was a last-minute addition and was going to replace one of the other songs in the soundtrack, possibly Dangerous Type, possibly the closing credits. And I think that's why it pushed Dangerous Type off the soundtrack. The album ends with a reprise of Damn Dog by Robin Johnson, this time a live version at something called the Clio Club. Incidentally, check out this cool picture of star Robin Johnson made up as her alter ego. It was taken by Mick Rock, the unbelievably awesome music photographer who captured everyone from Bowie to Bolan to Lou Reed. It's every bit as vibrant and iconic as any of his pics. And I think it's a great shot. So that's Times Square. If you've followed me this far, perhaps you'll follow me a little further. Cruising, 1980. Put out through Columbia Records with this really cool Laura Marr label. Cruising is a crazy movie. Incidentally, my friends over at Jiffy Pop Culture did an episode on cruising that you should definitely check out. Search for Jiffy Pop Culture anywhere you look for podcasts. If you want to follow them on Instagram, they're at jiffy.popculture. And if I pique your interest with this album, and I can't believe I wouldn't, you should head over and listen to that. Full disclosure time when it comes to cruising. There was a time when me and a very good friend of mine became obsessed with the movie Cruising. I mean obsessed. What's that? Oh no, we were both straight. Why do you ask? We each loved the director, William Friedkin, and were fascinated that such an A-list director and an A-list star in Al Pacino would make a major studio-backed film set in the gay leather underworld. The song Heat of the Moment kicks off this disc with style. Oh no, not that Heat of the Moment. This one is by our old pal Willie DeVille, who you may remember from That Summer with Spanish Stroll. Heat of the Moment sounds almost like it belongs on the soundtrack for The Warriors. It's got ace production, and Willie, if you don't know him, is one of the coolest sounding of the original NYC late 70s downtown music scenesters. Willie never blew up as big as his downtown punk counterparts, but he definitely had the goods. My favorite song by Willie is Let Me Dream If I Want To. Anyway, the bass in Heat of the Moment is funky as hell, and you're going to want to move to it. The next song, Loneliness, is a killer track. It's performed by the Cripples. It's got such a clean yet angry sound, almost like a cross between Fear and the Cars. Spy Boy by John Hyatt is next. And I know what you're thinking. What's a nice boy like John Hyatt doing in the gay leather underworld? Well, maybe John's not so nice, because this track sounds as creepy and subversive as anything else on here. It may confuse some of you who know John Hyatt mostly as a country artist, but in John's defense, most of the guys in here are wearing chaps. Assless chaps. Are there any other kind? The next song, When I Close My Eyes I See Blood, is probably my favorite song on this whole album. It's the most on point lyrically. Well, we'd better wait for the next track. And it features lyrics like, watch it when you see me come. I don't take no shit where I come from. When I Close My Eyes I See Blood is by Madeline von Ritz. Her real name is Lynn Castle. I'm sure she's not the only one using a pseudonym on Cruising, either in front of the camera or on the soundtrack, but it is a great fucking song. Side 1 ends with a much needed dose of comic relief in the form of Lump by Mutiny. My friends, Lump is the money shot on this album. There's got to be a better way of saying that. Lump seeks to answer that eternal question, Lump, Lump, can you cut the funk? The song was originally released on Mutiny's 1979 album, Mutiny on the Mothership, alongside other dance floor gems such as Funkin' Bop, How's Your Loose Booty, and Electric Hot Dog. Mutiny was the brainchild of the original P-Funk drummer, Jerome Bigfoot Braley. Jerome founded Mutiny with a couple of P-Funk mates after leaving P-Funk following a dispute with George Clinton over money. That's just George being George. The song Shakedown by Rough Trade is delicious and almost sounds like the Pointer Sisters fronting the Runaways. Just picture that shit. Pulling My String is another Willie DeVille track, with Willie using a much tougher voice, almost like he's auditioning for the Cripples. Pulling My String is very on point for this flick, especially once you get in the manhole. It's the name of a club. The song Lion's Share is, in my opinion, the most relentless song that the Germs ever did. It's a heart attack of a song. The Cripples return with Hypnotize, which is another very loud, angry scree that sounds almost like Lee Ving trying to do funk. Willie DeVille is back to close out the album with It's So Easy, which is one of the most iconic songs off the soundtrack. Well, iconic if you know this obscure movie. I like to think of It's So Easy as the soundtrack to the inner monologue playing in the killer's head while he's out cruising a leather bar looking for his next victim. It's a perfect song for this soundtrack. Look, if I can turn one person onto this soundtrack, my work here is done. Another Rockin' soundtrack, The Last American Virgin. This came out in 1982 on Columbia Records, and you can kind of tell from the cover what kind of movie it is. That is a zipper on some jeans coming down, and the whole cast comes out. Party size. It's a cruising reference. This teen sex comedy movie was brought to you by Golan and Globus, the Israeli minds behind Canon Films. It's an American remake of the super successful Lemon Popsicle film, one of the most popular films Israel ever produced. I won't go into the film too much. Suffice it to say, this movie has a killer gut punch ending that is one of the most realistic endings ever in any teenage sex comedy. And it's that ending that elevates the film above its genre. Now, on to the music. Quick question for anyone that's already seen this film. What's the one song you think of when you think of this movie? The Cars' Shake It Up. Not only was it used prominently in the film, but it's the main song used in advertising for all movie trailers and TV commercials about the film. But it's not on the soundtrack. Inexplicable. This happens all the time for contractual reasons usually. There is a Cars tune on the soundtrack though, and it's Since You're Gone, which I must admit, to be fair, fits a lot better with the actual movie's wistful vibe. But I'll put a link below to the trailer, and you'll see just how fun this movie looks with Shake It Up advertising it. As for Since You're Gone, it's one of my favorite Cars tunes. On to the rest of the album. Tommy Two-Tone kicks off this album, and no, it's not Jenny 8675309. It's a track called Teen Angel Eyes, and it's charming AF, to coin a phrase. The Police show up with the do-do-do, the da-da-da. The song's lyrics, especially the chorus, have always left me unimpressed. But even given that, the song is irresistible. And the Police were big as hell in '82, and that was a good get for the soundtrack. We also have Whip It by Devo, every non-Spud's introduction to the band. In any case, if you don't know it already, Whip It is a perfect song. You already know of my love for Devo. If you don't, please click on the link above and be taken to Devo worship. We also have I Know What Boys Like by the Waitresses. I Know What Boys Like just has that snarky, sarcastic, beautiful tone to it. And it's a new wave classic. There is I Will Follow by U2. I talked about the Police being a good get for the soundtrack. This soundtrack was a good get for U2 at the time. They were a little band. I Will Follow was their big song. Getting a song placed on a big American movie, well, as big as Canon was a pretty big deal. I Will Follow is the height of the U2 that I love. No matter what the band would later become, there's no way I don't get excited when I hear I Will Follow. I think it is the greatest guitar riff The Edge ever came up with. One really great song on this soundtrack that you may not know is Are You Ready for the Sex Girls by the Gleaming Spires. I almost called it a one-hit wonder, but it was the one song that the Gleaming Spires got any notoriety from, and it is a great song. In case you're wondering who the Sex Girls are, the lyrics tell us they are the women without any faults. I'm ready. I'm going to put a link below to Are You Ready for the Sex Girls as my call out from this album, because I think you should hear it at least once. I have one more album that I'm going to be reviewing. If you want to go there, it's patreon.com/Pop Culture Graveyard. So check it out. That is it for this week on Pop Culture Graveyard. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you think of this Magnificent Seven. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that little bell. And I will see you next week with a lot more cool stuff.